haven't left you much time, sorry. But this is does anybody here know that radio show Click and Clack, the Tappet Brothers? You know, about the car talk guys that they talk about two brothers back and forth, and they make jokes about fixing cars. Well, today you are in for a treat because we have the Tappet Brothers of Special Ed. Joe Petner and Bill Henderson. Both are retired principals. Joe retired from the Haggerty School in Cambridge, where he was for, I think, 18 years as the principal, and now is consulting to school districts through the Department of Education's DSAC program. Bill Henderson retired from the Ahern School, and they turned around and named the school the Bill Henderson School. So what can you say? But both are not strangers to us. We've had them in many ways, and this year when we were thinking about what we should do in terms of the program, it struck us that the two of them together are a dynamo team. So, Joe and Bill, come on down.
Joe, am I on? Remember way back when we started teaching? I don't think there was anything that was even called special education, was it back then? Boy, these sighted people take a long time to get ready, don't they? Is the memory still there? Can you remember way back when we started teaching?
Yeah. Don't drive like my brother, Bill. It is our great pleasure to be here this morning, and we feel very much a part of the community and the kind of kindredness that is part of this annual conference. Anytime that I can spend a day, a Saturday, with Bill is my idea of a great time. So we're here to go through a little bit of conversation between us. We've designed this for audience participation. Meredith has given us all permission to, when we get to the singing parts, be sure that you are joining us. So yeah, Bill, back in the day when we started, we did not have the benefit of legislation and policies that supported the education of children with disabilities. In fact, the basic right of free and appropriate public education was being highly debated, and many students with disabilities did not have access to our public schools. We both saw the initial enactment of Massachusetts General Law C-766, which became known as Chapter 766, in 1972, and yes, that does date Bill and I. It's also important to note that our legislation in Massachusetts served as a model for the first federal special education legislation, Public Law 94-142, enacted in 1974, and later was replaced by IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, 17 years later. You and I, as principals, were involved in the early days of implementation of those provisions of the legislation designed to maximize access to public education and minimize the stigmatization of students with disabilities through supports and services provided by the development of the individual educational plan, and the presumption that these supports and services should be provided in the least restrictive environment. Bill, yes, in looking back, I think we would both say that we've come a long ways since those early days, but as the Carpenters song says, we have really just begun.
You know, Joe, there are a lot of people right here from Massachusetts that were the visionary leaders that helped make these laws and policies become a reality. Tell us a little bit about them.
Yeah, so in thinking about people who've been most influential along the way, Martha Ziegler certainly comes to mind. Martha gained national recognition as a leader and activist in the fight to secure educational rights for children with disabilities. This at a time in our country when millions of children were being legally excluded from school and parents were urged to institutionalize their children. Working in Massachusetts with a coalition of professional organizations seeking to end this exclusion, Martha spearheaded a coalition of parent-led organizations, and with her leadership, parents across the country worked in partnership with professionals to secure crucial educational rights for all children with disabilities. Martha's legacy lives on with us here today in this annual conference, and by your show of applause, appreciation for her work as founder of the Federation. Gunnar and Rosemary Dubois were also influential in the early days of advocating for children with disabilities and the right to be educated in the public schools. Gunnar was involved in 2 cases that went ultimately to the Supreme Court, and in both cases the court handed down decisions that affirmed the right to treatment and education of developmentally disabled children. Rosemary was a pioneer as a promoter and advocate for parent rights and involvement as a key to the success of a child's education. Senator Kennedy, well known for his unrelentless effort on behalf of children and co-sponsored the legislation that we knew as Public Law 94-142. Kennedy was also a sponsor of the No Child Left Behind legislation, which he supported from the fundamental belief that all children can learn and we should hold schools accountable for seeing that they do. Kennedy later sharply criticized No Child Left Behind because it was underfunded by the Congress.
You know, Joe, these are terrific individuals, and there have also been some wonderful organizations right here in Massachusetts. It's made a huge difference in teaching students with special needs. I think first of the Federation and all the PACs that they supported. How many of you are involved with a PAC? Don't raise your hand, say, I am. I am. And the PACs are tremendous. We have the Institute for Community Inclusion, a lot of university folks, local chapters of TASH, Council for Exceptional Children, really lots of just tremendous organizations, Mass Down Syndrome Congress, and of course, let's not forget the MAC, Massachusetts Advocates for Children.
Bill, I'm glad you mentioned the Mass Advocates for Children. Hubie Jones was the founder of this organization, and they were a critical force in bringing attention to the thousands of students with disabilities who are being denied access to public education in the Boston public schools. The story of their efforts, which led actually to the enactment of Chapter 766, was documented in a video marking MAC's 40 years of service on behalf of children and families. The video is most inspiring and encouraging and tells the story about what we can accomplish when we become activists and build community. We wanted to share this video with you this morning.
Neurologist said, you know, if you're planning to have other children and you want a normal life, maybe you should institutionalize them.
The school committee member said, "We do not educate a vegetable."
She's not going to be able to read, she's not going to be able to do many things, she's not going to be able to live independently.
We had families, parents particularly, who came to talk with social workers about the fact that their children were being bounced out of the Boston public school system. The school system was saying that the youngster was too retarded, too disturbed. In many cases, the school was too dysfunctional to really do the job.
We wanted to integrate him very early, but we knew that it was very difficult. It just did not work.
Something has to be done about it systemically.
They were seeing children who simply weren't going to school for any number of reasons, and Huey and others resolved to gather together.
There has been evidence of young people excluded from school illegally. We got from the school department what we knew we would get, and that was denial. I think maybe what we ought to do is form a task force on children out of school. We decided to have kind of a quasi-public hearing to which we invited school officials to testify to the task force. And some of it was like unbelievable. We're beginning to get radicalized. We're beginning to get angry.
So they'll have the same opportunities of every child who's educated in this country.
Across the front page of the Boston Globe was this message: 10,000 young people are excluded from the Boston public schools. The community was shocked. What you're doing is taking a social condition that is horrendous, that most people don't know about, and you're lifting that condition up to becoming a social problem. And we use it to go up to public officials and say, look, something has to be done. The Speaker of the House, David Barkley, called us and said, will you please send me 500 copies of the way we go to school?
It was an opportunity to give kids a chance. That's what we were all really about.
He got the 500 copies, he sent it to the legislature, he sent it to groups in the community that he was affiliated with and aligned with. And then he called us in to say, okay, I want to write some new legislation. Would you work with us? Then the Task Force on Children Out of School, which later became Mass Advocates for Children, members of our board and team and groups we were aligned with, sat down and worked with him and his staff to create Chapter 766. It is the greatest piece of educational legislation in the history of the Commonwealth. Basically helped bring thousands of young people out of classes for the retarded that were, out of the mainstream of the school. Youngsters who were handicapped, who were not being, served in schools. It got people to think about, and educators to think about, how do you educate all children together?
Teachers learned that there were different learning styles, and that by modifying curriculum and adapting approaches for special education children, it also was good for typically developing children as well.
And it was a sense of empowerment and entitlement that Chapter 766 said every child must have an education. So whenever we sat down, we knew whoever we were talking to, they had to educate John, they had to accept him, they had to work with him.
Education, as you know, is so much the key to anybody's success. And for these children who had been denied an education and would have been denied education, it was a lifesaver and a godsend for them and their families.
Chapter 766 has helped us tremendously.
I'm going to use my son again for an example. So here's a kid that was given every opportunity in education. He now has his own business. He gets support in his business. He has a driver's license.
Those laws have put us as equal members of the student body and has allowed us to have voices and to be seen and to be heard.
Because of Chapter 766, my brother Sadie has the same opportunities that I do.
When I grow up, I want to be an activist on Disney Channel.
I am now onto my next challenge, which is to become a vocational rehabilitation counselor.
My favorite subject in school is math.
I like to read.
My teachers, they're pretty good. I mean, they help me.
I got all A's, I
really well socially. I was supported with interpreters. I had VOC, and that just made everything in my life easier.
We are Chapter 766.
I am Chapter 766.
I am 766.
We are Chapter 766.
I am Chapter 766.
We are Chapter 766.
I am Chapter 766.
We are Chapter 766.
We are Chapter 766.
I am 6.
Speaking of respect, I'm reminded of Judith Heuman's work as the Assistant Secretary of the Office of Special Education Rehabilitation Services at the U.S. Department of Education, and her story about being denied her teaching license because the New York City Board of Education did not believe that she could get herself or her students out of the building in case of a fire. Newman became the first person in a wheelchair to teach in the New York City public schools. Bill, I know you have your own story to tell about being told to get out of education.
Yes, it was 1974 after my first year of teaching, and I met an eye doctor, and it was my first time of feeling a lack of respect because he said you might be losing most of your vision due to retinitis pigmentosa, RP, and he asked me what I did for a job. I told him I was a teacher, and he said, you need to get out of education. And then 7 years later, in 1981, when my vision was getting worse and I wasn't sure what I was going to be doing, I went for another advice, and I met an assistant superintendent, not so enlightened as the superintendent from Taunton, and I asked this man for some advice, and he told me not to worry because I qualified for disability retirement. Respect is shown to individuals with disabilities by how we talk. Do we focus on positives and potential, or do we obsess on limitations and deficits? Respect is shown by how we interact with individuals with disabilities. Are we welcoming and enthusiastic, or are we cool-hearted? Do we offer to provide all the supports necessary to learn and succeed, or do we say, you can participate, but you have to do things the quote-unquote normal way, just like everybody else? Respect is shown by how we challenge students with disabilities. Before No Child Left Behind and Ed Reform in Massachusetts, kids with disabilities might have participated in general curriculum, but their test scores didn't count. We didn't measure what we treasured, and a lot of kids were dealt and treated with lower expectations. If we respect students who have disabilities, we challenge them. We don't teach down, we teach up. We challenge them to do their best academically, to do their best physically and recreation and fitness, and do their best socially and emotionally. We need to prepare them to grow up to live in a diverse world where they can continue to go to post-secondary education and training and to be able to work, perhaps with supports, but to be able to live in a community. How are we doing in Massachusetts, Joe?
We have at times taken the wishing and hoping approach to looking at how our children are doing. We certainly made progress, but we still have a long way to go. I've been looking at the data published by the Massachusetts Department of Education in my current work with the district and school assistance centers for the greater Boston region. And Bill and I will post up this information so that you can look at it more thoughtfully and in more depth. We'll post it up on the conference site. And this information is all in the public domain. And so you may want to look at how your school and your school district is doing in relation to student achievement and outcomes. Overall, Massachusetts students with disabilities earned higher scores on the National Assessment of Education Progress and exhibited high school graduation rates on average than did students with disabilities in other states. In 2013, students with disabilities in Massachusetts scored at or near the top of the national distribution on the NEEP English and mathematics tests when compared to students with disabilities in other states. This finding was generally consistent across the grades. I want to take a moment and just go over a little bit of the data facts. In looking at proficiency achievement scores in the period of time 2004-2006, as measured by the MCAS, we see that the general education students' level of proficiency is higher than students with disabilities. There is a gap. And that gap is pretty consistent. We see a little bit of uptick in 2006. Fast forward to 2013, and again, the 2013 NEEP scores, grade 4, so same grade cohort. But look at the difference here in proficiency, students who are scoring at or above in the proficient levels. Massachusetts, students with disabilities, 29%. Students in the general ed setting, general ed students, 65. In reading, we see a similar pattern of 17% at proficiency or above, 54%. So while we know that students with disabilities outperform their special education counterparts in other states, it is important to note that on the MCAS tests, we still have a long ways to go. Tom Hare has looked at this more systematically and has published a report called The Review of Special Education in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And again, in looking at the data that Tom presents in his report, and the fuller report is available on the DESE website. Again, we have referenced this. But we see that proficiency rates are higher for students who are included in the gen ed setting. And when students are in more restrictive environments, their proficiency scores are low. Important to note here that we're talking about the highest level of proficiency still in the needs improvement category. We also can see that equally of concern is the discrepancy between low-income students and non-low-income students. So Bill's question is a very central and critical one. One last slide here. I've looked at, in my work, I haven't named the districts. What's important is the data that this table is showing. If we look at graduation rates between gen ed students and special ed students, it is worrisome. 69% in District 1 of our gen ed students versus 38% for our students with disabilities. That pattern's pretty consistent across those 8 districts. Dropout rates, with a couple of notable exceptions, are higher for our students with disabilities. And in relation to, so where are our students being educated? We're not at the target that the department has set, around 59% of our students being fully included, that is spending 80 to 100% of their time in the general ed setting. So, Bill, you and I have had some great conversations. What do you make of this gap in achievement and outcomes for students with disabilities compared to their non-disabled?
Well, there are a lot of factors, but I am absolutely convinced that we should be doing a much better job across the Commonwealth of providing all the accommodations and modifications that students need. If we are supporting students with their accommodations and modifications, we're going to get a lot more satisfaction. I had to start trying when I was 30. I lost my ability to read regular print. If you want to know, now I can't see any print, so you all look equally beautiful to me, if you want to know what I say. When I was 30, I still could fool around with large print. I had a closed-circuit TV, and I put the material down there, and I could read, but it was a lot more tedious. So it'd be like, I am at the Federation Conference in Boston, Massachusetts. And, you know, and it dawned on me, I had lots of students that I had worked with and that were in my school that had other print disabilities, mostly dyslexia, who were reading and decoding that way. Now, we know that with good instruction and early education and RTI, for some kids with mild print disabilities, they go away. But for those of us with moderate or significant disabilities, they're never going away. And we have to learn to live with them. You know, and that's why Charles Schwab, who's a financial leader, if he reads a book with his eyes, it takes him 4 months, okay? And the governor of Connecticut, he's only good for a page or two, and then he has to go with it. And 30, 40 years ago, the accommodations weren't so great. You know, you had to get somebody to read to you. That doesn't create independence. It's not sustainable. But since then, the technology has changed dramatically. And so many of these accommodations are free. We don't even know about them, don't use it. Debbie King, are you nearby? Debbie, would you stand up? Hold this digital player. How many of you either have a child or work with students who have print disabilities? Say, I do. I do. You can meet Debbie later today, sign up with Perkins, get a free digital player. She can tell you how to get access to tens of thousands of books for free, either with that digital player or you can download onto your computer. If you have aging parents or grandparents, she can tell you how you can get newspapers on the telephone. This stuff is free. It's there. We're not using it. And I realize that ideally for kids who have print disabilities, you want text and speech, okay? Because now with Common Core and high standards, when kids start getting chapter books in the 2nd grade, they need to keep up with that material to be fully informed. And while we're working with decoding and rules-based phonics programs to get them to read with more fluency, some kids, if they don't have access and accommodations, will fall further and further behind. And some are going to need that throughout life. And right now, we can get our books for free scanned. Years ago, we had to do it. It was tedious. Bookshare.org, we'll scan them for free. NIMIS, a federal law, provides textbooks for free. And the devices have gotten so much less expensive. You know, I was in my old school just the other day, and with Google Chromes for $200, kids can access all the print materials and read at or above grade level with print disabilities. And that's all it costs, a couple hundred. Look, how many of you use glasses or contacts? Say, I do.
I do.
Would you be as independent readers as you are without them? No. Why aren't we providing the full accommodations to kids with print disabilities in our progressive Commonwealth in all schools when they need it? You know, not to provide accommodations, I say, can be described by 2 words. Not to provide accommodations, in my mind, is educational malpractice. Joe, you dealt with a lot of kids, as I did, but who had some emotional impairments, and they needed different kinds of accommodations. What did you do?
Well, as Bill's talking, part of what he's got me thinking about is that we really do need new models, new paradigms. We need to sort of shift in the way we see our capacities to build and to build our educational programs, our classrooms, our schools that are responsive to the needs of all of our children. In 1989, when I became a principal of Haggerty School, I had a substantially separate ED-BD classroom, students who were so-called emotionally disturbed, behaviorally challenged. And in that classroom of 15 students, 14 of them were boys, and 13 of them were boys and girls of color. In a district, public school district at the time, that was involved in voluntary desegregation. The teacher of that classroom and I began to think differently and suggested to the superintendent and the director of special education that we would keep the kids, but we would support them by integrating them into the gen ed classrooms at grades 5 and grade 6. The teacher position we kept. She became our first inclusion specialist, and we created a new model of co-teaching. And that is, I think, the example of how we need to redirect, reinvent our supports and services on behalf of our children. I was saying to Rich the other day, part of what prompted my thinking are the questions those students had for me as the principal about why can't we be in the general education classrooms. I didn't have a good answer. So, Bill, we know that inclusion does matter, both in the short term for our children as they move through their education in our public schools, but also their life chances. We see discrepancies in outcomes for students with disabilities, as reported by the U.S. Department of Labor. The employment rates of youngsters in the age bracket of 20 to 24 with disabilities is half that of their peers, of their typical peers. I've been thinking a lot about this data that was presented last year at the keynote by Dana Yarbrough, and think about it in relation to our mandate under Race to the Top, which is to have our students college and career ready. This is an important outcome measure, which the U.S. labor statistics show that we're not doing all that well. So we need to work on this both from the responsibility that we have as educators to have our students college and career ready, but also we need to be sure that the community is ready to educate and employ our students. Now, Bill and I were talking about this, and we have some positive examples of several young adults that we've watched grow and develop over the past 15 years. You'll know, some of you will know both of them. Amy Robeson, a highly regarded person by those who know her, attended Mass Bay Community College for 5 semesters. She was involved in the drama program, in which she appeared in 2 plays and received an award. Currently, Amy works a few hours a week in the bakery at Sudbury Farms Grocery. She likes her job and the people there. Brian Heffernan.
I want to say, Rich did not pay us to include that slide. That was our decision.
Or Dottie. Brian Heffernan, you might remember, was one of the keynote speakers at the conference 2 years ago, I believe. Brian works 3 days a week at the State House, 1 day for Rep. Kay Khan, 1 day for Senator Krim, and 1 day for Speaker DeLeo. He does a variety of office works and attends various committee meetings. The other 2 days he works at the local Shaws. He does speaking gigs for the Understanding Our Differences program in the Newton Public Schools. He rows twice a week with the adaptive rowing program at Community Rowing. And through Athletes Unlimited of Newton, he plays basketball, attends a singing group once a week, and plays a variety of sports with the Tigers team every Saturday. I'm tired just reading about all of this. Brian has a public speaking website, brianspeaks2you.com. Again, we'll post this out for you. Bill, we know a lot about what it takes to support all students in the general education settings. initiatives like MTSS, Mass Tiered System of Support. Rich acknowledged Madeline Levine, who's here and doing one of the breakout sessions with our colleague, Sean Connolly. And they are working across the state, providing professional development around universal design for learning as it relates to academics, and the PBIS, Positive Behavioral Intervention System for Behaviors. These are best practices. These are what we know to be the teaching strategies that help our students succeed in the general education settings. As we're closing, Bill mentioned the use of people first language and the expectation that everyone is capable of becoming what they ought to be. Here are some examples of people who became what they ought to be. Bill will now introduce us to one of his students, Nair, who's becoming what he ought to be.
Well, it was a team effort, and you can get it if you really want. So Donna Richard Shaheed, would you please come up? Jamal Shaheed, Nair, Aaron McNannis McLaughlin, please come up here with me, and also Claire Dewey, because I have a story to share. We're going to end with this. Donna, you come to me first. I did not get to greet them before this morning. Hi. So everybody else line up next to us here. So I had this parent, this amazing parent, and she's a triple P. Triple P means she's persistent, she's pleasant, and she's pushy. And okay. And her daughter was in our school, Ayana, and they lived it, and they said, but why can't her brother Nair come to our school? I said, well, I don't know. What did the IEP team say? And they said he needs to be in substantially separate. And I said, well, that they decide. But she kept pushing me, and she was persistent. She said, well, but don't you believe, in inclusion? I said, yes, I do think inclusion. It may not work for everybody. She said, but how do you know it won't work for my son Nair? I said, I don't know. How does anybody know? How is it even still in 2015, I meet parents out there and their kids don't even get a chance to be included? How do we not know? So she pushed me, she challenged me, and she brought up Nair. Nair, where are you? Give me your hand. Wow. Nair, I knew you when you were like this. How old are you now?
15.
15. And Nair, when you first came to us at 8, you were a little bit of a challenge, You weren't very verbal, so we didn't know what was going on. You liked to try to run home a lot of times, okay, when first getting used to us. So I had to find two not only excellent and committed teachers, Claire Dewey and Aaron, but one of them was particularly fast. You can figure out which one. And then we had to try those positive behavior supports. And Jamal, you don't know it, but the best positive support was a picture of you with a smiley face. Where are you, Jamal? Give us that smile. All right, so those teachers had lots of things. Daddy happy, daddy sad, okay? And that worked, okay? And we did activities. And then we connected you with some art teacher, Mr. Johnson, and a Mass College of Art student. And we found there were some tremendous gifts inside. Can you put up that one slide? Do you know this young man who, when he was 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, so many principals, assistant superintendents, psychologists, neurologists, say, no, he can never be included. We tried him out. His artwork, is it up there?
Yes.
Okay, so let me describe to Paul what it looks like, because I think it looks good. His artwork represented all of us in Massachusetts at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. Nair, you made us all so proud. You were our outstanding artist, and you have continued to blossom. You're talking a lot more. You've grown a lot. Your mom says you're texting now? Yes. Okay. You need to know when to do that. His artwork has continued to flourish. Can you put up some other examples?
Yes, I'm rolling through, anticipating what you're going to say.
He's
Bill.
one of the most talented artists in his high school. This is this young man who has blossomed. And how does it, it starts out, you can get it if you really want, but you must try. Shouldn't it be in 2015 that inclusion is the first option and the struggle has to be if we need to get substantially separate? Shouldn't it be that way? It's still not that way everywhere in Massachusetts. And that's why 40 years from now, for some of you who hopefully will be here again, probably not Joe and I, we want to talk about how we continue to grow and continue to get better. It is all about community. It's the Triple P parents with support of PACs and advocates and group like Federation. It's our students. You're our purpose. This is without you, we don't have work, we don't have joy. It's the whole family participating in that. And it's talented and committed teachers really not exactly knowing what they're going to do, but willing to try, willing to work with all the team. It is about community. It's about a community effort. That is the vision, whether you're blind or sighted. It's the community and the power of that. And it's we are family. We can do this.